Next question. We've got an interesting one. There'll probably be a bit of back and forth on this one.
Okay.
Do you think Nvidia is finally starting to adequately live up to their RTX and DLSS games support promise from the 20 series? This has been interesting because obviously we've been fairly critical, let's say, of
You have.
this.
I've been fine. Keep me out of it.
I've been fairly critical of game support for ray tracing and DLSS, especially initially. I think initially we did cop a bit of criticism at the time, but I think most people would acknowledge now that the ray tracing support that we got within the first year to 18 months was inadequate.
No, it's dismal. No, to answer the question, though, I think the answer is yeah. I think it has improved to a point where they've delivered on those promises. Obviously, if we got the kind of ray tracing support that we've got now, but in particular DLSS, if that had have happened soon after the launch, and you got to remember that we weren't even able to test ray tracing.
I think it was for 2 months.
Yeah, which is crazy given the way they, Jensen pumped it up in the presentations of it being the new it in a bit feature that you must have. And then the first implementation was Battlefield 5, and it was atrocious on both fronts. The ray tracing was not good. The DLSS was horrible. So, yeah, we've come a long way, or NVIDIA's come a long way since then. And I think it is now quite an impressive feature set. We're getting to the point now where I think DLSS is becoming a key selling point.
I think it's the key selling point.
Well, we've said, though, that we've said a lot in the past that ray tracing isn't, in our opinion, a selling point of like Turing or Ampere. Like it's not enough games. The games that it is in, half of them it doesn't make sense to be in. And then Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Shadows are, very little difference with it enabled, and there's quite a few games like that. But we are getting some games now with ray tracing enabled. It's arguable. It certainly does look, it certainly changes the look of the game, and you can get it. I think you've put it like with Cyberpunk, it is a compromised gaming experience for most people. They're having to dial down other settings to enable ray tracing, but
on a mid-range GPU.
Yeah, but you could argue that it looks better.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
So there is merit to it, and then DLSS. It's huge in a lot of games, and like DLSS is a very important feature if you're playing a game like Fortnite or Call of Duty.
It's in Call of Duty Warzone now, so that's a pretty big feature.
We haven't looked at it in that, but we imagine that it's going to be quite good. And again, as we've been saying from the start, ray tracing in a game like Fortnite is dumb, because in Fortnite you want to increase your FPS and you don't care about image quality. You're probably playing on competitive settings, which is low. Call of Duty, similar kettle of fish there. You don't want ray tracing in Call of Duty. It's already had it. You want DLSS. So we haven't analyzed how good DLSS looks in that game, but also it kind of doesn't matter as long as it's pretty close to native, but you get that 40% or whatever it may be FPS boost. It's a success in that title, like it is in Fortnite. So, or, quite a few other games it's in now. So I think they have.
I think it's the way that it's currently set up is becoming more of a good compromise between multiple different types of gamer. Mm-hmm. Because you're more like ray tracing really is going to be for your cyberpunk type games. Mm-hmm. And DLSS, while it is going to make ray tracing playable in those sort of games, it does then help people playing games that you've just been talking about. Mm-hmm. And then they've got features like Reflex as well, which is another interesting addition for your esports competitive titles where they aim to reduce input latency. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of targeting multiple different people there. I just think that the initial Nvidia targeted the wrong thing from the beginning, and that if DLSS was as good as it is now, then that was the feature that I think really would have pushed those cards more heavily.
Yeah, but also it was in it
was in no games.
So you could count the games on one hand for how long. So yeah, the fact that it's in quite a few games now and the implementation is good does make it, as we've been saying, a key selling point. We're still not both. I don't think we're terribly excited about ray tracing. I'm not. I
think, let's finish the DLSS discussion because I think there's a bit more to talk about with ray tracing.
Okay.
But with DLSS, it's definitely gotten to the point where I think there's now enough games that it's becoming a bit of a pain point for AMD.
Definitely.
Whereas previously, if we were talking a year ago, it's kind of the game support list wasn't really there. And especially for the 20 series, the issue with the 20 series was that DLSS support didn't come out in a timely fashion for owners of those cards. So by the time the 30 series came out, you could have just basically waited for the 30 series. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're ignoring stock issues, but...
Yeah, and glossing over the fact that the 20 series offered absolutely nothing new in terms of cost per frame.
Yeah.
So it's like I think as Gamers Nexus, Steve often says, we get it NVIDIA, you can make a 1080 Ti. So that's what the 2080 was. And then for the extra performance of the 2080 Ti, you had to pay a huge amount of, a huge premium for that extra performance. So basically, cost per frame was not improved. The selling points, as far as NVIDIA was concerned, was these RTX features, DLSS and ray tracing. And for the 20 series, it's like the support just wasn't there, or the quality.
Yeah, I don't even think it worked that well, though, for sort of your buy and wait thing. Because a lot of people have brought up the thing of, people at the 20 series got rolled at the time because no games support any of these features. But if you held onto that card, well, now you can start using DLSS. But in my opinion, it's still a case where if you were upgrading for those features, you were better off just waiting until the next generation, which is kind of what we said at the time was probably going to be the case.
Definitely.
But certainly now, I think that, as we said, DLSS is in enough games, it's supported in enough of the key titles that people may want to play, that AMD is suffering from not having it, whereas that wasn't the case 2 years ago.
Definitely.
With ray tracing, I think a lot of this question is specifically asking, is it finally starting to adequately live up to the game support promise from the 20 series? I think ray tracing probably still isn't there.
It's closer for sure.
It's closer, but if you look back at the presentation where NVIDIA was talking about like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the reflections in Battlefield, a lot of what they were showing was much more impressive than the average ray tracing game that we have today.
Yeah, and there wasn't the whole performance penalty associated with that either.
They didn't really talk about that at the time, did they?
It was unclear what kind of... I don't think... Obviously, no one expected the performance impact to be anywhere near as significant as it was, because I remember at those events when it was like press were leaking out, it's only playing it at 60 FPS, and everyone was horrified that an RTX 2080 Ti was playing Battlefield 5 at like 1080p at 60 FPS. And then it turns out, it can even be worse than that. So...
Yeah, I think with ray tracing, DLSS is easy because it makes games better most of the time. So if a game has DLSS, it's like, that's a tick. We can add that to the list of games that use it. Whereas with ray tracing, it's so much more complicated in that it's like, well, in some games it looks good. In some games it does virtually nothing. So it's like, do you count a game where it's just ray tracing shadows and doesn't really do anything as being like a key ray tracing title? Or do you only focus on the games where it makes a significant difference, like maybe a Watch Dogs or a Cyberpunk or a Metro Exodus or one of those, or Control, one of those titles? I still think we're at the point where, and this isn't really NVIDIA's fault at this point, I don't think, but it's like game developers are only some of the time choosing to use ray tracing in a way that is worthy of buying a ray tracing GPU. So if we rattle off like the list of games, and we just almost listed off the entire list just then, of games where it's really key to run ray tracing, it looks good, it improves the game, we still don't have that many games
at this point. Few games.
So, and that's only going to improve over time. It's going to be a big, a big push as consoles support it, AMD supports it. That's going to create more adoption. But at the moment, again, I guess NVIDIA didn't really promise it to be in like a trillion games right from the start. And we're probably we're definitely closer today than we were back then to an adequate amount of game support. And it's good in games like Cyberpunk, but I think overall, DLSS is really the thing that they've been able to live up to, taking a few iterations. But we're currently there, I think.